Thereupon he answered with a parable. There were 2 men went up to the temple, one a sinner, the other a saint. The sinner stands with a broken heart before the sanctuary, and dares not lift his gaze, but lets his eyes fall to the earth. And he says in his heart, Father in heaven, thou knowest I am a sinful man. Forgive me, and have mercy on me. The other, the saint, stands and says in his heart, Father in heaven, thou knowest me well. I am not like that man of sin who stands over there, but I walk in thy ways and perform thy commandments. I say to you, the sinful man returns newborn and without sin like a little child, and the saint is laden with sin. When the company had calmed down from the ecstasy into which it was thrown by this parable, a man stretched out his arms to the rabbi and said, Teach us, Rabbi, how to pray. He answered, Do not think that your Father in heaven does not know your needs even before you have prayed to him. Therefore, pray in this manner, and repeat the words after me, one by one. Then the rabbi covered the bread with his hands, closed his eyes, and said the prayer, and the congregation repeated it after him, word by word. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in heaven as it is on earth. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins as we forgive those that trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but protect us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, for ever and ever. Then he took the flat cakes, broke them into pieces, and distributed the pieces to the assembled, to the women and children, as well as the men. His own piece of bread he dipped in salt. Then he closed his eyes and said something to himself. But as he was about to put the piece of bread in his mouth, a voice was heard from the further corner of the table, Rabbi, we have forgotten to wash our hands before eating. The rabbi looked toward the man and said, To the pure, all things are pure. He put the piece of bread in his mouth and ate, and the others did the same. I turned round to see who had had the impudence to interrupt the rabbi, and in the dim light I caught a glimpse of a face half hidden in the crowd, and I was startled, for I was certain that I had seen the face elsewhere. I could not recall where or under what circumstances, so I turned and looked again. Those yellow tufts of beard on the long face, they could not be mistaken. But who was the man? Then it suddenly came back to me. Always, as I passed from the outer to the inner court of the high priest's house, a man had been seated on the steps near the guard, and always I had been struck by the appearance of his beard, which consisted of long yellow tufts growing separately out of moles, like knolls of trees on little hills. But I had been struck still more by his eyes, which were blue as polished crystal, cold and dry, as if they had never been washed by tears, as if they were not made of flesh and nerves, but of stone. The light that came from them was gathered into thin, penetrating shafts, like sharpened spears. Even when my back was turned to him, I felt the shafts on my neck, stinging the flesh. Nay, more, even when the man was absent, I could not pass his accustomed post without feeling that I was being observed from behind a door or an invisible opening in the walls. Now surely this was the same man seated here in the company at the rabbi's table, and yet it could not be. I looked a third time, and certainty continued to fight with doubt. This was indeed the man's nature, to sit, not openly among others, but half-hidden, sending out the steely shafts of light from his eyes. What confused me was the face, which was so different now in its expression of sadness that I seemed to see it for the first time. There came up in my memory my conversation with old Hanan, in which he had made mention of the rabbi of Galilee. Could he have sent one of his men here to observe and report? Cunning old fox, I murmured to myself, your eyes and ears are everywhere. Meanwhile, the feast went on. The company was made up of poor folk, and the meal was a meager one, such as these men and women were accustomed to. It consisted for the greater part of flat cakes and olives, greens and sour milk. They dipped their bread in honey. There was one delicacy, the little baked fishes. The rabbi took one from the earthen platter in front of him, ate, and passed the platter round the table, and each one lifted a fish with his fingers and ate. The rabbi did the same with a platter of dried figs and dates. Between one course and the next, they repeated various psalms, following a leader who knew them by heart, and with the progress of the meal, a great spirit of unity grew among them, so that they became men, women, and children, like a single body, with a single soul, their rabbi. When the meal was ended, Simon brought a dish of water to the rabbi, who washed his hands. Then the dish was carried round the table, and everyone did likewise. The faces of all the assembled glowed with intense joy. It was as if the presence and utterances of their rabbi had opened for them gates of happiness which they had thought eternally closed to them. And as they sat and stood thus, locked in one radiant expectancy, there was a sudden noise above their heads, as of something creaking and breaking. What was this? From the low balcony screened with palm branches, a bed, with a sick man lying on it, was being lowered by ropes. The press of men and women made room. 2 mighty hands were lifted up. They took hold of the bed and placed it near the rabbi. What amazed me most was the composure of the guests, who accepted this strange procedure as if it were an ordinary thing. On the bed lay a living skeleton, which tried to lift its bony arms toward the rabbi. The face was hairless. The head, too, had lost nearly all its hair, so that it looked like a disinterred skull, and the face was dead, except for the agonizing eyes in their dry sockets. The white lips moved, and from them came a whispering stammer, "Help me, man of God!" New figures had appeared in the doorway. The room had become more crowded, and now a forest of hands was lifted toward the rabbi, and innumerable voices implored, "Rabbi, help him!" The rabbi stood up. I see him now, white-robed and barefoot, and took 2 steps toward the head of the bed. He bent down over the dying man, and their eyes met and fastened on each other. Thus several moments passed, while the rabbi held the sick man's gaze in his own. The rabbi's face was pale and strained. The veins on his temples worked like tiny snakes. Then he placed his hands on the withered body and said in a loud voice, "Mordecai, son of Isaac, dost thou believe with perfect faith that I have the power and have been given the permission of our Father in heaven to heal thee?" The sick man whispered word by word, "I, Mordecai ben Isaac, believe with perfect faith that thou, Yeshua ben Yosef, hast the power and hast been given the permission of our Father in heaven to heal me." The rabbi straightened up, and it seemed then to me that his head reached to the stars, but he still kept his gaze fixed on the sick man, whom he now addressed in a voice of command. "Mordecai ben Isaac, by the power of faith, I bid thee rise from thy bed." The sick man stared back as if he had not understood the words, but the eyes of the rabbi remained fastened on him. Then, suddenly, he moved his hands, gripped the sides of the bed, and tried to lift himself. The first time he fell back, but he tried a second time under the imperious and relentless gaze of the rabbi. His face filled with terror. He rose a little, and his head fell forward. Still the rabbi held him transfixed. Spasms of pain shot through the body as the man turned and put one fleshless leg and then another on the floor. The legs trembled as if the slightest weight would break them, but as if they felt the command of the eyes shining down from above, they straightened out slowly. Slowly the man rose. He took 2 stiff steps forward, and fell on the rabbi's breast. "Hosanna!" A wild cry of joy rose from the guests. Hands were stretched out to Mordecai. A sack was thrown over his naked body. They laid the man down tenderly near the table. But now the newcomers filled not only every cranny of the room, but overflowed into the yard of Simon's house. They had brought all manner of sick with them. 2 powerful men thrust their way through, leading a young woman possessed of evil spirits. They had tied her with ropes. The evil spirits screamed out of the woman in unknown languages or imitated the cries of household animals. Others came, bearing their sick on their backs. A great clamor rose, wails of pain, sobs of entreaty, exclamations of prayer, mingling with the hideous noise of animals, a ceaseless clucking and barking and mewing which issued from the possessed woman. I thought I had been trapped on an island of demons, or that I was being engulfed in a sea of putrescent humanity, of sickness and madness. An unbearable stench spread from the decayed bodies and distended mouths, and finally I did not know who was mad, they or I. And above all the tumult, the night rang with a sustained cry, "Hosanna! Hosanna!" I wanted to flee from this witch's cauldron, and I caught at my friend's hand. But there was no retreat through the screaming press of human beings. We perceived also that the rabbi was exhausted, and that in another moment he would sink down and become part of the writhing, weeping, crying heap of wretched bodies which surrounded him to the height of his waist, for they had made their way through to him. They kissed the hem of his robe. They called out, "Hosanna! Hosanna!" It was then that Simon suddenly bestirred himself. He lifted up the faltering rabbi in his mighty arms, drew the white mantle down over the tired face, and treading on human bodies, carried his burden out of that sea of misery and pain, as one might carry a drowning man out of the waves. At the gate, as I was about to cross the threshold, I encountered the man with the yellow tufted beard and sad face. I stopped him. "Judah, man of Kiriot." He looked at me in astonishment. "Who calls me?" We looked straight at each other. "Do you not recognize me, in spite of these clothes? Who are you, then? Judah, do you not recognize your hegemon?" His eyes pierced through me. "How should I, a poor man, know the hegemon?" "Judah, have I not seen you in the court of the high priest?" "In the court of the high priest? Certainly. I serve the high priest, as every good Jew does." "What are you doing here, Judah Ish Kiriot?" "I came to do honor to a great rabbi, according to the Jewish law, and to sit at his feet and listen to God's word. But what is a hegemon doing here among Jews?" He turned on me. I must confess that I was compelled to retreat under his penetrating glance, and still I could not quite make up my mind whether this was indeed the man who sat in the court of the high priest, or whether I had come across a remarkable but accidental resemblance.